Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today we're going to be talking about the real reason why you have PMS and female hormone symptoms. Excited to dive into that topic. Before we do, please smash that like button. Make sure you hit subscribe so you get notifications like this when I go live and you can be part of the conversation. Put your comments down below. Love to hear your thoughts on the topic. All right, so let's dive in. So PMS or female hormone symptoms, this is more pertinent to if you're a cycling female, usually either that week or so lead up or maybe a couple of days, 2 to 3 days, or even into that period where you're menstruating, there can be some symptoms, right? It could be anywhere from mood, irritability, to anxiety, to depression. You could put like back pain, cramping, any of those type of issues on that list. And especially as you menstruate, especially if you have heavy menstrual flow could be one. And then that could drive more fatigue because you're losing a lot of iron and maybe even going slightly anemic as you menstruate. These are all common symptoms that you see with PMS and with cycling hormone imbalances. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. You know, some of my healthiest female patients that are still cycling, they go into their period and it just kind of sneaks up on you. That's kind of the most ideal situation. You may have a little bit of fatigue or a little bit of cramping or tightness but that shouldn't be too severe, and it shouldn't be something that lasts more than a day or two, ideally, right? Obviously, there's a couple of reasons why hormonal imbalances happen. So let's kind of talk through them. So progesterone's a big one. When you look at the typical female cycle, I'll pull up a video here, or like a month-long chart if I can, and I'll show that to you guys. Maybe that'll make a little bit more sense here on the YouTube side. But typically we have two parts of our cycle. We have the follicular phase and we have the luteal phase. Those are the two parts of our cycle. The follicular phase is the first half of our cycle. Think F follicular, F for first half, okay? And that's where the follicle is essentially produced. And that's where essentially the egg comes out of that follicle. And that follicle is actually going to produce hormone. So typically the first thing that you're going to see, month-long female cycle, I'll pull this up here for you guys so you can see it. This will make a lot of sense. And I'll share this right on the screen with you guys now. It's going to pop here. Oh, this is a good one. I love this one right here. That's the perfect one because then you can see how the endometrial lining also kind of shifts too, which is pretty cool. Okay, that's going to come here right now. Okay, so first off here, right? We start off, this is kind of your endometrial lining from your last period. So this is kind of the period happening. You have this drop. If you go back to the month before, imagine this kind of superimposed over here like it's the previous month. You're going to see this drop in progesterone and a slight drop in estrogen as well. Estrogen's the yellow line, progesterone's blue. That drop starts to trigger the endometrial lining to flush out. So you can see that endometrial lining drop over here, day 0 through, let's say 4, right? The average typical menstruation, maybe 3 to 7 days, but somewhere in that time frame. And day 1 is typically your first day of flow. So when you start to have flow, not spotting, that's going to be your first day of your new cycle. So what starts to happen here with a drop in hormones from the previous month, which would be over here, is going to happen. And then that's going to trigger your endometrial lining to flush out. And then you can see what's happening over here. This is your follicle. So that follicle starts to mature, and you can see, let's just say, the FSH starts to rise right here in that day 1. That follicle starts to grow. As that follicle starts to grow, it actually creates estrogen in and of itself. Estradiol starts to peak, and as that estradiol starts to rise up, that triggers the LH to then surge right after it. And that surge in LH starts to raise that blue line, which is progesterone. So think of it as like this. You have a domino rally. The first domino is going to be the endometrial lining sloughing off, and then that's going to then trigger FSH to increase. The next domino will be the follicle to grow. As the follicle grows, estradiol increases. As estradiol increases, LH comes right behind it. And as LH comes up, then progesterone comes up. And kind of where estrogen peaks and progesterone starts to rise, that's where you're going to start to have ovulation. Ovulation is going to be right into that zone. And so that's important. And then you're going to see the last half of the cycle. This is the luteal phase. Think of L for luteal, last half, F follicular, first half. And this is where progesterone predominates. And a lot of PMS issues tend to happen due to a luteal phase defect, either a shorter luteal phase or that progesterone just falls out sooner. It would typically fall out. So if I just kind of give you guys a for instance here, let's just say I superimpose this. I'll put it up in my paint if I can. That'd be cool. And let me just upload it to my image editor here. And I'll pull it right on screen. Let me see if I can do this for you guys. Let me change screens here for you. This would be really cool if I can draw it for you guys live. window. Yeah, here we go. Okay, cool. And let me draw this for you guys. All right. So if we look at it like this, I'll make this nice and thick. So here's your progesterone right here. And if we start to have lower progesterone, let's say we're starting to get stressed, right? Progesterone can go downstream to cortisol. And so imagine our progesterone starting to fall out like this, right? And so essentially all of this progesterone that should have been made over here in red is now not made. So this starts to lower our progesterone, and this can start to create all the different premenstrual symptoms, right? And so a couple symptoms here, we talked about the breast tenderness, back pain, any mood issues, any irritability, any fluid retention, right? Hormones are going to cause fluid retention. Obviously, when you start to hold more fluid, you may have bloating, and then hormonal issues. Skin is also kind of on that list. And so you can see this progesterone defect, and this is what starts to drive a lot of the hormonal imbalances. And even before that, you're going to see one thing even above this that actually impacts the neurotransmitters is dopamine. So just like progesterone can actually go downstream to cortisol, dopamine can actually go downstream to adrenaline and our stress hormones called catecholamines. So you kind of have adrenaline, catecholamines, or epinephrine, norepinephrine. These are different kinds of neurotransmitter stress hormones. And when dopamine starts to drop because we're stressed, that actually starts to take the brakes off of prolactin, and prolactin can go up. And so prolactin can start to throw off and dysregulate the cycle. So stress starts to throw things off, and it's kind of a downward cycle, right? Because as you start having low dopamine, you start to get moody, you start to have sugar cravings. As you eat more sugar and processed food, that drives more inflammation. That starts to suck down or cause more imbalances in your progesterone, because your progesterone is going downstream to make more cortisol. So you can see how this cycle starts to go out of whack. And obviously there's going to be a genetic individuality of what symptoms premenstrually you're going to have. Some will have everything. Some will just be moody. Obviously you have the extreme PMS, which is PMDD. That's where you have the extreme depression, extreme mood issues, right? PMS is premenstrual syndrome. And then you have PMD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD. And that's just really just the PMS mood symptoms, just like on steroids, like super intensified, right? My opinion, it's still the same imbalances that are driving it. They're just going to throw you on SSRIs or some type of tranquilizer to numb out those symptoms. So in general, you got to get to the root cause, right? And so that's kind of what's happening physiologically. So you can look at neurotransmitters, you can look at progesterone, you can look at different herbs to kind of modulate that, whether it's chaste tree or maca, or whether it's herbs to help with the estrogen, because sometimes estrogen can be really high in this whole thing. So I showed you these symptoms over here, and then you can see, let's say over here, here's your estrogen. Let me just see if I can change colors for y'all. We'll just do estrogens in yellow. So we'll go yellow over here. But see this estrogen right here? This estrogen may be higher in some, right? Or it could be higher over here. And that could just be impacting the hormones as well, because when you start to have higher estrogen, now that progesterone to estrogen ratio starts to get skewed, and you can have more bloating, more breast tenderness, more hormone symptoms. So it may not just be on the progesterone, it could be on the estrogen, or progesterone and estrogen could be equally low, but maybe estrogen is higher but still low than progesterone. That can still throw off the hormonal imbalances as well, because you have estrogen dominance. Doesn't necessarily mean high estrogen. It means that ratio could be off. So you got to keep all these things in mind when you're looking at the hormones. But the first thing I tell my female patients is blood sugar is one of the best things you can do. Managing blood sugar is one of the best things you can do to stabilize your hormones. Your hormones will buffer out high and low blood sugar. And if you're not getting enough nutrients, you're low calorie, or if your blood sugar's off, that can start to impact sleep and create sleep issues, maybe not as much restoration. So all of these things can throw you off. So the first thing I'm looking at is blood sugar stability, good proteins, good fats, looking at nutrient density, looking at all the inflammatory foods that could be in your diet. If you check that off, great. And the next thing is, how are you digesting and breaking down your food? Some people with crummy digestion have a hard time even breaking down healthy foods. That could be another avenue that we have to go down on a deeper fashion. The next thing is, do you have a handle on all the emotional stress in your life? Right? If you do, great. If you don't, start dealing with that. Even just the idea that you wrote it on a list and then you're taking some action, whether it's just you're taking some action, whether it's a budget for financial stress or date night with your husband to work on your relationship, right? Whatever it is, right? You're taking some level of action. Your brain's like, ooh, thank you. You're doing something awesome. And that can feel a lot better. It's usually the things you swept under the rug and you're not dealing with. Those are the things that tend to be the most stressful. And then the next thing is you can look at nutrients. So we can talk about different herbals. I don't like to go into specifics because I like to have labs. And I like to know what pattern we're dealing with before I say, hey, this is what you should do. But there's different herbs, like I mentioned, that can help on the progesterone side. We can even use progesterone ourselves. There's different things we can help on the estrogen side. There's different things we can work on to help modulate the estrogen receptor sites. If we have a high level of estrogen, we could give things like maca to actually blunt that a little bit. Or even if it's low, that still works as well. We can do things if we're seeing like 2-methoxy, 2-hydroxy metabolites really high. That's a sign that we're not metabolizing estrogen well. We may want to give extra nutrients like DIM or calcium deglucarate or more glutathione building blocks to help lower estrogen metabolites. And of course, we're going to look at all the diet and lifestyle things. Are we eating soy phytoestrogens? Are we drinking out of any plastics at all? Are we microwaving plastics? Are we eating organic, right? Most pesticides are going to be organochlorine. They're going to be estrogen based. Are we consuming organic meat, or are we consuming dairy with Similac or Posilac, which is the growth hormone? Or are we consuming meat with with hormones to fatten the animals up? All these things matter. And so it's so tough, right? Because when you see all the inputs that I'm kind of talking about and I'm laying it out on the table, and then when you go to your OB and they just like, hey, here's a birth control pill, it's going to jack up your estrogen 3 to 5x. Hey, it'll smooth out the rhythm, but it's going to put it up here. You kind of see like, well, that's not fixing it. Or when they give you an antidepressant, that's not fixing it, right? When you understand the physiology, and again, anyone listening here that sees the screen and kind of understands what I'm saying, just basically, you probably know more than most medical doctors do about this, because their brains are just like, oh, this symptom, this drug. They're not thinking about the physiology like this. Maybe back in medical school they did, but not in practice. It's hard to do that in a 2 to 5 minute appointment. And so now that you understand it, like, all right, what interventions, what tools are you going to deal with? If you're just managing hydration and just managing blood sugar and improving nutrient density and getting sleep, you're doing a ton right there. And then now if you add other things in there and you get testing and you look at all the levels, it can really give you amazing insight into what's happening at the root cause kind of hormone level. So hopefully that gives you some good insight. Let me hit a couple questions here. And if you guys want to dive in, if you need more support, you want to go under the hood and get to the root cause, again, my team and I, we see patients worldwide. So if you want more support, there'll be coordinates down below in the description of the video where you can get access. So if you want to dive in, feel free and reach out. I'm happy to help. A couple of questions here pop in. Okay, hormonal acne, bloating, digestive stuff, definitely bad cramps with Mirena. Yeah, so the Mirena is the progesterone IUD, right? So that's the synthetic progesterone. That's the norestrogel IUD. So there's the Mirena. There's also the Skylar, and there's one other one. And so that's a lower dose synthetic progesterone, and that just kind of bleeds throughout usually quite a long time, 3 to 6 months at least, maybe longer. And so the problem with that, there's just no drop in hormones like you would with a birth control pill. Normally you take like, reminder pills maybe on day 22, 23 for like 4 to 6 days. And that allows your hormones to drop and then you bleed. With being on an IUD, especially a synthetic progesterone IUD, you're just going to kind of trickle blood flow quite frequently. So not the best. Again, if you want, let's say an IUD, the copper ones are going to be better. Can still cause some side effects, some cramping, some bleeding issues in some females, but it's non-hormonal. So it just gives you the other option. May not be the best, but it's still better. We love fixing without losing birth control pills. Yeah. So again, it depends. I would want to make all those other changes and see how much better things get. And then I'd also want to kind of gauge your level of openness of trying a non-hormonal based birth control and see where that sits. Clean lifestyle, no fragrances, chemicals, and I have low estrogen according to my last saliva tests. Yeah, so really I'd want to get everything else kind of dialed in first here, Sarah, see where you sit, and then we can kind of talk about like what other options, like the Paragard may be a better option if you want like a set it and forget it type of birth control. If not, you can always, use a barrier method and just, track your cycle and just avoid intercourse during that day, probably 12 to 17 to be safe. Couple other questions. Yeah, it's so true about doctors. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You look at doctor situations, right? Most doctors, they're drinking out of a fire hose. They learn all these things. They cram for a test. They spit it out. But if you really go to have a conversation with a doctor 5 years outside of medical school, even a couple years, a lot of this stuff, they're not going to know. They're only going to know what they learned in their residency and what they're utilizing day in, day out, right? That's what is applicable to them. At one point, they knew it. But if you learn something, but you don't learn it in the application of like, oh, I understand about what a luteal phase defect is, and I can see it on your cycle, and then I can make these diet and lifestyle changes, and then we can retest it. We can see it improve. We can see your hormones shift and you feel better. That's like, oh, there's like an application. There's a real world thing. If not, it's just textbook and theoretical. So hope that helps y'all. So in general, just try to make one little tweak here, one little change. I think that's a good first step. Blood sugar wise and reducing inflammation is going to be the best thing. And so reducing inflammation by cutting out the processed grains and flours and processed sugars and processed seed and nut oils. If you're going to do fats, choose coconut, ghee or butter if you can. If you have acne, maybe not. And maybe on the monosaturated fat will be avocado, olive oil, all cold pressed. Those are all good options. Eating avocado is great. Good healthy fats, good proteins at each meal. That's really an awesome foundation. Start there. And then other fats that we'll do if we have a lot of skin issues, I will do some black currant seed oil because that does modulate the prostaglandins that can drive female hormone acne. We got to also look at your estrogens and how you're metabolizing your hormones. That can play a big role. All right, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Again, links down below if you want to reach out, and I hope you enjoyed. And please feel free and share with friends or family, and a thumbs up would be appreciated. All right, take care, y'all. Bye now.